My name's Adele Onyango and welcome to another episode of Legally Clueless. No, seriously, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Hey you, welcome to episode 212 of Legally Clueless. Oh my goodness, I'm wearing the wrong jacket. You're just going to be hearing the jacket throughout. Let me take it off. This is not that kind of... Not that kind of podcast. Anyway, welcome to the fam. If this is your first time ever listening to the podcast, audio episodes like this go out every single Monday. You can stream them on Spotify or everywhere else you get your podcasts. And make sure you also head over to legallycluelessafrica.com. And while you're there, watch our 3 seasons of our video series as well as our tour series. Sign up to join our community, and we have 2 events upcoming. So you can check out our events page for more details on our virtual workshop and our next group therapy session. Oh my goodness, we're doing some really awesome stuff. For the OG members, can you feel that? Like, can you compare where we are now with where we were in like episode 1? Oof, episode 1. I still get so embarrassed by it, but anyway. I'm very grateful to have you as part of the family. I'm very excited about this particular episode because it features somebody who I bumped into by chance, by circumstance in November. Turns out she was friends with my late mom. Listen to this.
Oh my God, Adele. When I left my marital home for good, underline for good, I had my newly rented apartment in the suburbs of Nairobi burned. My tailoring business that was flourishing in the Nairobi Central Business District was also set on fire. In fact, my mother said, we don't go to court. God will fight for us. But if this kind of violence is because of mere goats and cows, why don't you come and take your animals? So my mother called him and said, I don't want to lose my child because of 2 goats and 2 cows. They arrive, they refuse to enter the house. My mother is called, she comes to the front door. Oh my God, Adele. Once the dowry was returned, do you know what I felt? Freedom.
Her name is Rosalind. Her story is coming up a little later in this episode. And her story was the first time I ever heard of dowry return ceremonies. Let me tell you, what communities do to women is just ridiculous. But anyway, we'll get to her story in a bit. Song of the week. I really love this song. I'm in such a mushy mood. My goodness. I don't even know why I call it a mood first and foremost because I'm mushy 24/7. But I think it's so much more now. And I was listening to this song and I was just like, oh. So if you are a member of the mushy crew like me, you will love the song. It's by Savara of Sauti Soul, Kenyan band, in case you don't know. He has a solo album out. I was bumping to it a couple of weeks ago, and I fell in love with a song called Changes. So I've put a link to the video in the show notes. The video is on YouTube. I thought it was quite interesting as well. But yeah, you can stream the song. Tell me what you think. Does it make you mushy as well? Anywho, moving away from that, bit of a catch up before we jump into 100 African stories. So I'm recording this, of course, on Sunday, which is my recording day. And Friday was 11 years since my mom died, and I'm just in an era of really appreciating not only her as an awesome mom, which she was, but her as my personal best friend, and just kind of seeing that, you know, there was an added layer to our relationship. It was such a beautiful friendship, and I'm kind of in the zone where I'm allowing myself to feel the sadness. I'm not angry. I didn't feel angry. I'm just sad. I feel like my friend can't be here, and I'm in that zone of my grief. But it's the first time I felt so grounded. Like, my emotions don't feel destructive. I think other years, maybe until the 9th. The 9th year was hard. Last year, last year was hard. Okay, so let me just say, in the last year, I've just been allowing myself to feel the emotions, not run away from them. With time, I felt like grounded, like my 2 feet are on the ground even when I'm feeling the sadness. Before, I used to feel like I'm distracting and everything is falling apart. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for that, to myself for doing the work that has gotten me here, but also the people around me holding me together. And, last week was strange. So my mind does this thing around my mom's anniversary. I'll struggle to remember the date and dates around it. I'll struggle to remember meetings and calls and things like that. So on Friday, I forgot so many things. Okay, maybe not many, but like 2 things. I was just forgetting things here and there. It was uncomfortable, but I kind of understood why it was happening. So I was being gracious with myself. And I have such good people in my life. I felt very covered in kindness. So as much as I felt sad, I also felt safe and loved. I was also proud of myself for being open to receive kindness. I don't know if that's something you battle with, like when people are being kind to you, I don't know, like your first reaction is like, no, I got this. I'm good. Hyper independence, isn't it? And it's like a trauma response. I think I do that a lot. Well, I used to do that in the past, and now I'm actually reaching out and saying, hey, I'm not okay. Or when somebody's kind to me, my first reaction is just like, it's not, no, I can handle this myself. Now I am welcoming kindness into my space, especially because I have such good people around me. So yeah, ouch. Why my phone is trying to dismember my fingers. Anyway, that's kind of where, because my phone should not even be in this room when I'm recording. It's a lapse. Anyway, that's where I am with my grief. I think we should do an episode on hyper-independence and learning how to ask for help. Yeah, because it's taken me a long time to get the point where I am now. And it's not even like it's super easy. It's still a struggle. I think I'll start researching on that topic. If you would like an episode on that, hit me up on our Instagram page. A link to it is in the show notes, or just search Legally Clueless Africa. All right, I'm also super excited. I am heading to Senegal. My last trip in Senegal, which was in 2019. Yeah, I think it was 2019. There were things that I absolutely loved about Dakar, which is where I was. But I also had really bad experiences in the hotel I stayed at. Very aggressive men. And one guy who was at the conference and was like an MP from Malawi tried to enter my room at midnight, and the hotel had given him my room number, like the front desk. It was, and we were like in a legit hotel because we were in the equivalent of what, like a UN area. So you would think that, it's not like a dodgy lodge. Not that it's the case up in there, but you get what I'm saying? And so after that first trip, I was like, Senegal is great, but I'll never go back there alone. Fast forward to now, I am going there alone. Because I have to work. So I'm trying not to be anxious about the whole hotel experience and just being open. This is going to be a very fundamental week for me. One day I will share with you why. I'm not ready to yet. But yeah, I just hope while transitioning through this fundamental thing, I don't have like a loose guy trying to enter my room at midnight. But open mind, open heart. I think it's going to be a good trip. Okay, let's jump into 100 African stories. As I said earlier, I met Roslyn through The Moth. I was hosting a show in November for The Moth, and she was one of the storytellers. While we're doing rehearsal, she's like looking at me. And then she comes up to me and says, I think your mom was my friend. She's like, was your mom's name Mary Onyango? I'm like, yeah. She's like, it is you. Proceeds to tell me how in her second marriage, her husband was from the same area, village-wise, as my mom, well, as us. So my mom and him were friends, almost like distant cousins. And that's how she got to know her. And my mom held her hand through a period that was very difficult. I'm trying to be vague because this bit is in part 2 of our story, okay? I'm not giving you spoilers. Anyway, and at one point, my mom had gone to visit her on Ngong Road, which is a road here in Nairobi. My mom, being who she was, very forgetful, forgot her medication. I think she was on chemo or some cancer treatment at the time. So she forgot her medication there. So I was sent to go get it or something of the sort. When she told me that story, I was like, I vaguely remember this because I was quite irritated. Oh my goodness. But I do remember it. And I just love bumping into my mom's friends and people my mom interacted with. It's almost like she's still here with us, Anyway, back to Rosalind's story. Her and I just clicked, and I knew she had to be on this podcast. And so we did it. And she shares a story about love, about marriage, about death, and about a dowry return ceremony.
100 African stories on Legally Clueless. Stories from Africa.
My name is Rosalind Orua. I am from Bondo in Western Kenya, tiny rural village in Western Kenya called Wagoma Village. I am the director of Rona Foundation, a non-profit that supports and works with rural widows in Siaya County in Western Kenya. How I met my first husband, let's start there. I was working at the government printers as a designer. Now I'm in the age where you introduce your life in seasons. When I was in my 20s, when I was in my 30s, and now what I'm doing when I'm in my 40s. So when I was in my 20s, I used to work at the government press. I was a civil servant working as a designer. We came in as interns, and my ex-husband was a supplier, and he was actually a friend of my family. So he's someone I'd known with the networks of my brother-in-law, because I lived with my elder sister, and so it's someone I'd known. And so then when we met at work, and we were young, beautiful, tall girls, of course, you just come from the village, you don't know the city, you're figuring your way out in the city, and then you're like, oh, this guy is vibing me, why not? Compared to college boyfriends who picks you, drops you, throws in some money, and you're like, looks good, could do. But then I guess women make those decisions. You date, you fall out of love, you fall in love. So that's where I met him. We used to do lots of stuff, fun stuff. I'm a consumer of rumba. I'm a rumba culprit. In those days, Koffi Olomide still used to come to Kenya. So rumba was like, we were real serious rumba culprits. John Junior days, Musa Juma days, serious lovers of music. So we used to go dancing. He was not a lover of alcohol, and so am I. So we were not like going to drink. It was like maybe, those days women used to drink Guinness. I don't know what women drink now. So, one Guinness here, a good night out, dancing. And most times we were just alone. So we had some very good times. And we used also to love business. He was an entrepreneur, and he was really good at it at that time. Actually, truth be said, he's the one who mentored me into becoming an entrepreneur, how to do tenders, how to market your business, I was already a designer. I knew how to design and print. So from him is how I created my first business at 18, on-set designers that I still run to date. So I really learned a lot from him as a business person. He was meticulous. He was hardworking. Furnishings, he was big on furnishings, fitting carpets. So I learned all those tricks from him. So it wasn't just a partnership about a marriage. I was a young girl really at that time, and he was also building the capacity, and I had the potential. I'm a quick learner. So we had a good relationship in a good working partnership, I thought. Then. He did ask me to marry him. But I don't think he asked me once. It was like a question of conversations over time. Mm-hmm. Like we already have this energy around us. And I think he was also looking for a woman to be with, He was flamboyant enough, the Luo that he was. And he had some money and some swag. Mm-hmm. So it was not hard to say yes. Yeah. It was really not hard to say yes. And sometimes over the years when I've been dealing with a lot of loss and grief, I thought maybe it was a bad decision. And when I look back, I think it was the most difficult classroom, a life lesson classroom that I was in. Because I learned the best, and I also learned the worst from this same person. Talking about getting married and through a wedding or traditional, it's those ones of us, we go kwa mapera. You just get married under a tree, and your family gather, they take some dowry, and you are gone. So it wasn't a church wedding. It was, can I see your parents? My dad was already dead, so can I see your mother? And of course I went and told my mother, and my mother said, no, I don't agree, no, this person, I have bad energy about him, I don't support this one. And then later I kept on pressing my mother over time, and my mother said, because I love you, I'm accepting because I love you, and because I want to love what you love, but I know you are wrong. And my mother made it very clear. In fact, I think the day of dowry payment, my mother sort of said she was not going to take any dowry. and she was not going to. There's this dowry money. It's actually cash a year, and my mother said, I don't want to take it. Give it to my co-wife. So she rejected. Even to that particular day, she rejected, and I think she was right in rejecting. And so dowry was paid, and you know the way now you're married, you're supposed to live with your husband and go to your home. I didn't. I stayed with my mother, I think, for a week. I didn't know when you get married. I think in my 20s, what women deal with today, what I see in my work, is the things I dealt with. Decision making and their impact, career choices, life choices. I came from a rural village. I was that girl who didn't understand that these things mean something. You know, me, I thought marriage is just like, oh, dowry is paid. I can just go back to live with my sister in Imaradaima, in a suburb in Nairobi. And that's what I did. When I came from, after staying with my mother, I went and lived with my sister. And my sister kept on asking me, so when are you leaving to your marital home? Like, I'm supposed to be leaving. That is how naive Adele I was. That is how naive. And he didn't bother also because he wanted a new apartment. You know, he kept on saying, come around, we look for an apartment. I didn't. I was going to work and coming back to my sister. So until one time he said, no, this thing can't go on like this. I can't come see you. And already we are supposed to be a husband and wife. I said, no, I'm supposed to leave my people and come and live with you for good. And let me tell you, Adele, the day first year, so we got an apartment and then we moved. It was a beautiful apartment anyway, around Nairobi West, in Nairobi, a nice suburb. And then the first week, I knew I was not going to be there. I can tell you for a fact. The first 3 months, I used to tell him, you know, one day I'm going to leave. One day I'm going to leave. I knew it in my soul, in my spirit. I knew it was a mistake on the first day. Generally, women are spiritual beings. My mother used to say these things, that women are co-creators with God. You create and God creates. And so when I entered in what is called marriage, your marital home, I didn't feel like I belonged in it. I didn't feel I think we lost the connection the moment we called it marriage. The moment love changed its name, the connection was lost. Maybe love should not change its name. Maybe love should just be love. Maybe people can just be spiritually married and be, soul comrades, soul partners, because everything changed. Even the way he began to treat me, the demand for a child began. And then now me discovering my womanhood, was my womb capable of having children? Why was I not conceiving? And what did sex even mean? Because I didn't even know that sex meant that you need to have children. I thought sex was just for two lovers to just go on and, enjoy their company. So when those things started getting introduced, sex is for procreation. A woman is supposed to serve her husband. A woman is supposed to be home a certain hour. And then, of course, now he began also to put boundaries between me and my family, me and my friends. And for me, I'm raised in a very social and philanthropic family, very prayerful too. And so that didn't sit well with me. That changed how I had seen the world. I didn't see the world as two people buying one big fish, and we lovers of fish, and eating it alone. I thought, it's big fish. We could cut it into 3 portions, and because so-and-so doesn't have, we could invite them to dinner. So to him, that didn't happen. Bills were clear. How much were we spending on food? And you had to write down by the shilling if you bought onions. Those things, I found them strange. And I knew it had changed. No, they weren't there. Money wasn't counted by the shilling, by the cents. And we were also doing very great in business. So it wasn't that we were poor. Really, for me, I have never been poor. I was always the girl who walks in, designs a room, gets paid, designs brochures, magazines. I had always known how to make money because he had taught me how to make money. I had gone into a career where making money was really easy as a designer working for government. Money has always been easy to make with my skills. So when we started counting cents, then I knew something was not. And I'm a very philanthropic person. My family, my mother raised us feeding communities. There were children and orphans, many of them living with my father in where he was teaching as a head teacher, living in our household, going to school. So then I found myself alone. I'm not conceiving. Marriage, love has changed into marriage, and marriage is changing into something else. And the demand for bearing children is also here. Infertility issues are also at the door. Just the mental, the capacity to deal with that burden, I did not have it. And then I also think I flipped because it was too much to ask on a young woman in her 20s. The discussion about having children never really came up. But how do you know it is part of the discussion? When a comment comes like 5,000 cannot be spent in 1 week, and I'm feeding no child here. What does that statement mean? How do you interpret it? Also, why are your friends coming on Saturday and they are drinking a bottle of wine and eating pizza and laughing in my living room, yet there are no children there? Those conversations mean something. You got to interpret them for what they are. They are a demand for something, and that demand is about you as a woman, about your capacity as a woman to bear children. And then, of course, now you begin to look for medical. So, if it's about children, don't you check this? And most times he was the one finding the doctors, the gynos that we were seeing, because he was much maturer than me, much older than me by, I think, how many years? 7 or so? I think maybe over 7 years. And so he knew a lot more than I did. And so I would say, okay, why not? I would go and see a gyno and would say, oh, then of course ectopic pregnancy happened. And then it's like, oh, now it's bad luck. And then in the process, endometriosis was discovered and I had to go for another surgery. And then because he was the one finding the doctors. And one time, especially with the endometriosis surgery, the insurance refused to pay, because they said it was a pre-existing condition since I had had an ectopic pregnancy. And then he got pissed and he said, I can't be paying all these bills. We can't be spending money on health. Why don't you go the herbalist way? So we started going to the herbalist way. All in search, I tell you, Adele, the things women do to find a child. The feeling is a big loss. Women bury children. But here you are losing a child. And it was in 3 months, at a 3-month pregnancy. You're also losing a child and you're burying also. You don't even see the fetus. You don't see anything. But it's a loss. A part of you has gone. A creation inside you has been lost. I don't think it's as an equal loss as the loss of a physical human being that you've seen. But there's a part of you that connects with something growing inside you. And when you lose that part, because you lose in ectopic pregnancy, you also lose the part that tube that carried the child outside your womb. So you lose that part. So you're losing a child. You're also losing parts of your body. It's a loss all the same. And you have this scar left on your stomach, because in those days they were still cutting you physically as if you're having a child. And so it leaves a scar. My ex-husband, let's call him for who he is, was supportive, especially in the initial days, because at that time there was still hope that perhaps I could find a child. And it's somewhat, even while I knew I would leave, there was still that room of maybe we can figure this thing out. Then I realized at some point that feelings changed. I think maybe women also need to be sensitive enough to know when love changes, feelings change around love. And when the demands of life and, because also relatives begin to ask, where is your baby bump? Why is it not coming up? So those questions come along. I think there were so many elements against my understanding and my beliefs and my values as a woman. The fact that I was in my 20s did not mean that I didn't have my inbuilt values as how my parents raised me. I had them. I knew I was a smart girl. I knew I was a go-getter. I knew I was an entrepreneur. I knew I was meant to succeed. And anything that became a barrier around it, I started detecting it. So when his feelings began to change, I also began to detect them and I began to change. And then there was just a distance between us. He didn't show hate, but he showed an availability. His emotions were unavailable. His time was also unavailable. So we just grew apart. And I think you detach. And then I think in the process, because I was bearing more of the burden, I detached more. Adele, to be honest, I don't think I was ready. I 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 think I was ready. it wasn't one thing that he did. It wasn't. It was a collection of events. If I look back, it wasn't one specific thing that he did. I think really, let's give him some due, because lately I'm thinking maybe I should call him and let's have tea and have closure. I think he really loved me. Yeah. Let's be honest. I think he hadn't met someone like me, because I have certain gifts and certain skills that once you detect them, I am a very soulful lover. I'm a very intimate soul. I'm a Libra. I'm a deep lover. When I love wholly. And so I think he was really deeply in love. And so these elements changing, he also perhaps did not know how to deal with them. I want to cut him some slack. And because I was also ambitious and young in my own understanding and my quest in how I saw my life, I think I changed more than him. And then I realized that I didn't want to be, my life's worth be measured by number of children, and my values be... the way women introduce themselves in my community. When they ask you, what is your name? And then they add another very insensitive question. Where are you married? I didn't want my entire life to be tagged on where am I married, because I thought I was worth more than that. I thought I was the kind of girl and woman that I would escape in life with generations. I had capacity to build and create generations, empower them to something bigger. And even while I didn't say them, my life, the way I lived it, showed it. In my 20s, I was already cutting deals worth 20 or 30 million. In the 90s, Adele. So that could have shown him the kind of girl that I was. But then I think the fact that I'm a soulful lover, I was more demanding. I was demanding of his time. I was demanding of his ability to understand that the changes that were going inside my body, losing my body parts, this search for a child was also taking a toll on me. And that I needed a support system more engaged than what he was offering. And then because maybe, another thing I think now that as we are talking about this, is that do people really have capacity to love and love you in the way you want as a woman? Because I think he lacked the capacity to love me the way I wanted to be loved as a woman. And not his fault. Maybe I also didn't have the language to communicate it to him. And so then we just fell apart. And then I chose to leave. He didn't chase me away. I chose to leave. And then violence sets in. So love changed into marriage, and marriage began to change to hate. It started changing into hate with the second surgery, the endometriosis surgery. That is when it started changing. And that is the distance, that's when we started falling apart. And then that is when I communicated clearly, actually. I think the real change came when I communicated that I was going to leave, that I think I didn't belong, and that I think my body had taken a big toll. And this search for living with infertility was such a burden in the context of marriage that I didn't have the capacity to be in it, and that I wanted to search myself. In fact, what I told him, and I remember my words, is that I'm not living because of you. I'm living because of me, and because I think I need to heal to be even a better lover to anyone. Adele, let's talk about men handling rejection. I think he made a plea. I think he pleaded with me for a period of now we are talking about marriage turning into hate. He pleaded with me, could we repair it? Could we make it? Could we even do this? You do your thing where you are, I do my thing. And there was no room for me. I needed me for me. I needed first to find myself. What was my life about? Who am I? Why was I on earth? Was it just if I didn't have children, what more existed for me? Of course, I forgot that dowry had been paid. And then dowry tied a woman into her marital home forever in most cases. And so I forgot that bit when I left. And because I had assumed that because of who he was, goats and cows would not make sense to him. But my mother had mentioned to me on a phone call when we were discussing my exit that was going to be a factor. And my mother had said, if you ever died, they will have to return you to him. And I didn't want that. I didn't even want my body to be tagged on goats and cows. I wanted a liberation of a kind for me. And that kind of liberation meant that there was no price There was no dowry price worth my life. And something else that my father had done before he died, because we are 6 sisters with 1 brother. And when my sister died, my father had made it clear, and she was unmarried, that all my daughters are buried inside my compound. And he actually pointed a graveside. And he made it clear, no child of mine should die in a marriage. Bad, good, single. They will be buried inside my home, not outside. So I had come from that empowerment. So I knew, why would I be dead and then I'd be taken back to where I had left? Yet my father had made it clear to us that we all belonged to him. We were his children. And so when my mother said, and so then when later we left and the hate got in, and it just took I couldn't recognize what it was. I couldn't recognize the violence. I couldn't recognize the person. I could see handwritings everywhere of divorce. And I didn't even know then that it's called gender-based violence. Now I know it's called gender-based violence. The experiences of what I went through after I had left my marital home. Oh my God, Adele. When I left my marital home, for good, underline for good, I had my newly rented apartment in the suburbs of Nairobi burnt. My tailoring business that was flourishing in the Nairobi Central Business District was also set on fire. A government job that I'd held for nearly a decade, while I was also mushrooming and running my private business. You know the way Kenyans we hustle, was also terminated. And with it ended my scholarship in my second year at a local university. I don't want to say it's him, but why did those things happen soon after leaving my marital home? So every handwriting on the wall pointed towards gender-based violence that falls women when they choose a life better for themselves. I think I chose me, and I paid a very costly price for my age to go through such violence. Now that I am healed and thriving, I am in the place where I want closure, and I'm actually going to look for him and say, should it have been your hand, I forgive you. It didn't need to go that way. Should it have been your hand, I forgive you. And if it was not your hand, I forgave the people whose hands yours may have touched around it. Because I think even now that my life has turned the way it has turned, traveling the world, using my personal story to transform lives, we are able to see things from what they are, and we can also help even our perpetrators heal. I think this is one call and a meeting I'm going to do very soon. I intend to do it this year so that he also has closure. I'm doing it for me, but I also want to do it for him. When the communication stopped, when I closed the window of communication, I stopped the window of communication because I left because I wanted me. I wanted time for me with me. And then when I stopped that, I closed the window, the violence was triggered. I think the violence was also triggered because I was seen maybe out in the places where we used to dance with another guy. You know, I think that the way men deal with jealousy and competition is crazy. I think if I wasn't seen out with another guy, maybe violence wouldn't have come. If I would have just dealt in my small corner, dealing with my grief, not going out, not doing anything, you know, looking ramshackled, lonely, divorced, and afraid, maybe I would. But here I was still running my business. I was still trying to find my way into. I had a social life, and I was still trying to do the things that we used to do that for leisure. I think it didn't sit well, and I can forgive now. I didn't then. Let me laugh about the dowry return. So, because the violence was so violent and the impact of those actions was so huge that it became a rumor, it became stigma, it became discrimination, and I became the odd one out. The one, and my mother was called Mean Rosie, the mother of Rosie, Mean Rosie. So the stigma didn't only fall on me, it also felt on Mean Rosie. Like this rich man who came to marry her last-born child, and now that last-born child, because of just mere childlessness, has decided to walk away with her big head, seeking her life, you know, being spiritually awake. I mean, it didn't sit right. And so it wasn't just me being stigmatized. My mother too was being stigmatized. And then the fact that my mother had also mentioned to me that traditional marriages are not the divorce of traditional marriages take a very bad turn on women, especially when they are dead. Your body can be claimed. So all these conversations were in my head. But then my mother said, how does this then end? In fact, my mother said, we don't go to court. God will fight for us. But if this kind of violence is because of mere goats and cows, why don't you come and take your animals? And this was a discussion between my mother and an elder who was his relative, but coming from our village. Actually, part of the team that had brought that dowry. So my mother called him and said, if this is how I don't want to lose my child because of 2 goats and 2 cows, because that was what was paid for my dowry price and some money. And so that discussion happened between my mother and that elderly man. And then it was communicated to him. Then a date was set. The first date, he didn't turn up. I think the second date, he didn't turn up. The third date, my mother went to, I think that time they're called DOs, division officers, and the chief. And the DO made a phone call to him that this family wants you to go and take back your cows and goats so that their daughter can have some peace. So a day was set, and my mother called me to go to the village because now a day has been set. And of course, people thought he would come himself, but he didn't come himself. He sent a party of 3. One of them, that elderly man that my mother had first a conversation with. And they came, and then the dowry ceremony happened, which is like a small, quick ceremony ending in less than 5 minutes. They arrive, they refuse to enter the house. My mother is called, she comes to the front door. They greet her, she doesn't return their greetings. My uncle first argues with my mother as we are waiting, who is going to lead the ceremony. You can see patriarchy playing its hand, even in a dowry refund ceremony. So my uncle is kind of pissed off. My mother is kind of holding her ground. Then they come to the door and they refuse to, nothing, no conversation actually. My mother points to the male relatives manning the goats and cows to be released to the gate. They shake my uncle's hand, and off the dowry refund ceremony is over. It's like you're watching a quick, I don't know, they're called reels. Yeah, they're called reels on Facebook. It's like you're watching a reel of your life. But maybe when I complete writing a book, it should become a movie. And then off they go. And then that's the traditional divorce. I think the conditioning of you can train your emotions. Women can train. And I think because I spent so much time alone in the season of those 3 years that I lived with my ex-husband in my 20s. I spent the last 2 years of it, I spent a lot of time alone because it's an availability of time. And those times that that was the real gift. Isolation is a gift to me. And now that I look back, I say that was the perfect gift. That was a real school. Mm-hmm. He schooled me about gender-based violence. He schooled me about how to be yourself with yourself. You are your own company. You are the committee in your head. Mm-hmm. How to sit with the committee in your head. A group of people that sit together in your head and decide the destiny of your life and the course and the vision and how you want to do your life. Oh my God. The isolation time, the time that he thought he was hurting me by being unavailable when I needed him with the emotional burdens of endometriosis. The biggest gift he ever gave me. Forget the violence. That's the biggest gift because the things I've created by spending time alone. Mm-hmm. The vibe I have alone. If you saw me on a Saturday morning, dancing to music on my own computer, the time I spend alone in my room, just jamming, and the time I thinking, creating, innovating, being a critical thinker on my own, I can analyze and see the end. Even how I've become a good writer and a storyteller is because I spend time alone. I mull these words in my brain. So the gift he really gave me is to how to value your time alone, the gift of isolation. And then I don't know what that did to him. But what it did to me is it made me who I am now. I am my own company. I am my best critic. The worst part of it is that I criticize myself so much, even when I know I'm winning. I'm still not winning enough. You know, when the brutality that came with that separation and divorce, you know, I ended up living on the streets in Nairobi, Adele. My relatives and my sister said, you can't come into my house. That violence will follow me. My home will soon be burned. The rejection that came with that, until a good Samaritan, an elderly man from central Kenya, picked me, was a pastor, and took me to his, they used to be called some hotel, dingy hotels in Umoja, and said, we msichana, unakaa hapa kwa street, ukai, ni nini ilikufanya? Like literally asking me, what happened to you? You don't belong to the street. It doesn't show in your eyes. Come along with me, tell me. And me trusting him, a total stranger, to rescue me out of the streets. So the times that I have spent healing on my own, without therapy, I learned how to pray. I learned how to be solid. I learned how to organize my thoughts. I learned how to critically think about my decisions. I wasn't ever going to make rash decisions about marriage, things I don't even understand well. Now, if I was ever, of course I remarried, which is another story. But today, if I was to remarry, I would do it with the physical committee of people, not me alone. I would say, Adele, come. Let's have tea with him. See what I don't see. Tell me what I don't see in him. So yes, I agree with you. It's not easy for women to learn to be alone with their own emotions. And the kind of lies that comes with a woman who knows herself, the lies pegged on a woman who knows her truth, her authentic truth, and a woman who knows her purpose. You may not know your destiny, but you know your purpose. The kind of lies that were flying around me through my friends, my relatives, my village, people who knew us, our networks, the kind of lies. The other day, just last week, a lady who used to be our banker walked into my office. And then she said, Roslyn, you are commanding so much big money and you are only in your 20s. The kind of money you guys were commanding was shocking to me. And she said, I'm starting my business. Why don't you help me ideate, help me think through? And I said, well, I'm going to help you. But the same kind of women that knew me then were the same kind of how money was transferred, millions of shillings from our joint account to his personal account until I left with nothing, living on the street. It was in the hands of women. How women are also used to abuse other women. And I said, listen, the only thing I was doing in that time was escape from a system that did not recognize the value of my worth, a system that only wanted me, my womb, if my womb was healed and productive, a system that only defined women by the number of children they had. I escaped, and I escaped with a very heavy price on my life. I am here because God helped me. None of you, and you are much elderly than me, should have put me into a corner and taught me, this is what this is. This is gender-based violence. This is where you report it. This is what I had no clue. This is where you find, this is the church where women like you come and they get help. I had no help. So the help I offer people today, women today, is the help I needed. And I do it with all my heart. Oh my God, Adele. Once the dowry was returned, do you know what I felt? Freedom. All I wanted was escape, so I felt freedom. But the society and the community around me did not see it like that. In my head and heart, I'm the only one who sensed relief. Like, finally, they'll not bury me where I don't want. Finally, I get to choose where I want to be buried. Actually, I was just thinking about my death. I think about a lot about my death. I'm that girl. And so I sit with my mother knowing. And my mother was a big healer with her words. My mother was the greatest, now deceased, 7 years. My mother was the greatest support system I ever had. She became, later when I remarried and became a widow, she became a widow sister. When I was going through the divorce and the infertility, endometriosis, she was a mother supporting her child. Then later on, when I started the Rona Foundation, I was her teacher. educating her how philanthropy was done in these times. So we sort of exchanged roles. But in that time, soon after the dowry refund, I sat with her for days. Part of it, she was feeling a lot of pain, explaining why this had to happen this way to the community. And she decided to go silent about it. She never answered anyone. She never gave them, stories to tell. She didn't light the fire. She didn't add oil, fuel to it. So somehow she shut it down. She shut the rumor mill down by her silence. But then while she was doing that, she kept on telling me, you started climbing a tall tree from the top. You had to fall. So these are her words, her actual words. And she said, life is lived in the future with the lessons of the past. So she kept on speaking life back to my soul, pointing me towards my own healing, praying with me, reading Bible. Psalms 91 was a favorite. She kept on building me, rebuilding me. And then because I was running a business, I had to leave and come and back and start to rebuild my life. And she said, do you want to stay in this village forever? Would you ever want to leave? So she wasn't asking me to pushing me go. She was questioning what were my plans. Then I said, maybe I could go and look at my burnt tailoring business. Maybe see what I could recover. And even my tailors were also calling, asking, the tailoring machines are not burnt. We could, pull them out, clean them, and see if we can repair them. And that's what we did. The landlord admitted that it was gap in security. So they asked me, if you repaint your room and don't ask for claims, we can have you back. So then I repainted. The street boys that were protecting me while I was on the street are the ones who came to help me paint. This Sunday, I went to feed some of them. They're grown men now, so I'm still friends with them. And then when they see me, Mama, we will make, you made it. And then I always pay my homage. I pay my tithe. Sometimes, people take tithe to church. Me, I don't. I take tithe to people that need it, people that are poor, people that are vulnerable, people that are needy, and even sometimes people that are able. I take my tithe. Because I think there's a way you connect with people when you give gifts of yourself, but physical gifts too. So that's how it began. So with my mother's words and healing, I began to see that life was really possible in the future, that there was life after this. But there was always, a fear, a risk that was the violence going to go on? And if it did, would there be a valid ground now to physically go to court with the claims of no marriage now? And so then I began to rebuild. I repainted the tailoring space. We repaired the tailoring machines. Then women used to come into the tailoring shop. It was one room divided into two, with my front desk seated there, me seated there, receiving orders, making calls, doing designs, and my tailors at the back. But the women were coming in to begin to repair their clothes. Repairs are charged 200 shillings, 300 shillings, $2, $1, $5 at most. But they were bringing their repairs just to look at me. How much brutality I had gone through. How I left who was considered a wealthy man by those standards. Then I asked my tailors, charge double. I'm that girl, I'm that entrepreneur. Charge double. And then that's how we began to rebuild. So you would find in a day, our sales for just repairs were like 10,000. A girl could make some money. I could do with some money to pay rent, find a new home.
Catch more African stories in the next episode of Legally Clueless.
Wasn't that just so powerful? Like, she dropped so many nuggets of wisdom. And I can't wait for you to hear part 2, because it just gets so much more potent. Everything she was saying about relationships, I was just connecting with and really resonating with. Her thoughts on love are so aligned with mine. It shouldn't be defined by societal definitions. I think it's the two or more, whatever the situation, people who define what love is. When you add labels, you kind of get drawn to certain expectations. And so I feel what's important for me now in relationships is being with somebody who is very self-aware, because to be able to navigate societal pressures and expectations and then write your own expectations, you've got to have an insane level of self-awareness. It's possible to have it, but it requires a lot of work. And I think that's super important for me and in all types of relationships, even friendships, you know. Anyway, I love I could listen to Rosalind for days. Next week is part 2 of her story, and it's going to be the chapter of her life that had a very healthy kind of love, but unfortunately made her a widow, and was the birth of the impactful work she is doing. That's going to come up in episode 213. But while listening to a story, if you want to share your story, there's a link in the show notes. Fill out the form and we will get back to you and we can be able to have you on the podcast. We're also currently recording a lot of Pan-Africans, so people who are change makers and disrupting the norm across the continent, whichever country they're in. And it's very exciting to kind of shortlist the list of who we're going to be recording. And I thought, why not involve you? Because maybe there's people outside of Kenya who you connect with and you just love their spirit and their stories inspiring and you'd want their story to be amplified. If that's the case, just drop us a DM on Instagram. We're at Legally Clueless Africa and we'll follow it up from there. Again, make sure you head over to legallycluelessafrica.com. Check out our upcoming events. We have 2 events this April. One is virtual, so literally wherever you are in the world, you can jump in and be part of the fam. Remember to also catch this podcast if you're in Nairobi on Trace FM. Just go to traceradio.co.ke and you can find us there every Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m. and 11 p.m. and every Friday at 1 p.m. I am going to leave you now so that I can work on, my speech that I'm giving in Senegal, which should be fun. Yeah, but I'm wishing you tons of grace, tons of mushy emotions. I'm wishing you good people around you, man. Just good people around you. I'm really saying how important that is, and it doesn't need to be tons of people, even one. I really wish you that because I'm just seeing how magical. Ooh, how magical that is. What does that scream, Adele? How magical that is for me. Let me wrap up now before I embarrass myself any further. Thank you so much for listening to this episode.
That's it for this episode of Legally Clueless. You can share this podcast with your friends. You can keep it for yourself. I'm not judging. Just make sure you're here next week for the next episode.